I understand you're seeing a new wave of crowdsourced cyber attacks on both sides of this conflict. How would you describe the state of play? What are you seeing?
It's a pretty crazy situation right now in terms of traditionally we look at these kind of conflicts and we have one side and another side, maybe in this case Russia and Ukraine. Now we have the Conti ransomware group coming out on the side of Russia. We have the Ukrainian cyber police soliciting volunteers online to attack websites in Russia. We have lots of different players who feel that now is the time for them to kind of put their stake in the ground and go after what they believe in, and that kind of raises the stakes on the international stage of a possible misunderstanding between nations.
And what could that lead to? A possible misunderstanding between nations?
Yeah, look, I mean, look, attribution is always difficult, like knowing what's happening when you're looking at attacks on the ground, and nations have to respond to that. So if someone hits something in Russia, for example, and Russia misinterprets that as an attack from the United States or an attack solicited by the United States, then their response will come the way of the United States. It just adds chaos to an already dangerous situation.
Well, CISA is also urging U.S. companies to lock down their systems in case the Russian government or private hackers take action. It could, in fact, already be happening. You've got companies like CrowdStrike and Ping and Cloudflare offering their help, offering their services for free. What would you say is the threat level right now against U.S. businesses, U.S. entities?
Yeah, it's all down to how Putin decides to engage the West. How do they respond to these unprecedented sanctions that have been put in place? Ultimately, we think that there's largely, they're very capable in the energy sector. We've seen them for a decade or more in the energy sector, gaining a foothold, gaining understanding of those systems. And so there's a threat there, but we also think that there's a possibility that there could be a tit for tat sort of thing where they're going after the financial sector as well, which is a harder nut to crack in the West.
I want to take a look at Ukraine specifically, and you talked about all of these different entities coming to the defense of Ukraine. We're talking about from the EU to Lithuania to Romania to all of these different companies. How effective do you think this has been, and is this a path towards sort of further deterrence, cyber deterrence in the future when you see the rest of the world piling on?
I have a hard time thinking about cyber deterrence when you see the level of kinetic warfare going on. Like cyber is a piece of this story, but this human side is also much more distressing. What I would say in Ukraine, it looks like Russia has underestimated on all battle spaces Ukraine, both in terms of how their military will respond and how the West will respond, but also in terms of how solid their cyber defenses are. Ukraine spent the last 2 years well in terms of putting together defenses. And you know, Cisco's proud to have a role in that, in kind of providing actually on the ground support right now for critical infrastructure, ensuring that those systems stay up when the Ukrainian people need them the most.
There's also movement in U.S. Congress to take greater action on cyber attacks. You've got massive cyber legislation, which would require companies in critical sectors to alert the government of potential hacks or ransomware. You've got the ball now in the House's court. What's your take on this legislation? Is this something that you would like to see advance?
Anytime I see the government like, you have to notify us of something, my question is then what are you going to do with that information? I like that it's centered in and around CISA, because CISA has positioned itself as the sort of go-to agency in the United States to provide information both to the private sector and to government networks at risk, and gives a really good understanding of what our actors are using in terms of their attacks. So I think centering the information there signals that's how they want the information used, and I think that's a good place to put that information.
Now, look, the war on Ukraine is escalating, it seems, by the hour. What does that escalation look like in cyberspace? How bad could this get on both sides?
You know, the cyberspace element has been much quieter than we anticipated. And I think that's because Russia has kind of underestimated what they need to do in that space. And I think right now they're going to so overcompensate in the kinetic space that the cyberspace side inside of Ukraine just isn't of interest to them. And I think they're using their best resources right now, engaging in espionage on the West to understand what the red lines are and what the exit strategies are for everybody.